Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling confined spaces. We've got some safety training workshop materials here as our guide.
That's right.
And our mission is, well, pretty simple. Cut through the jargon, get to the core of the dangers, and understand how to stay safe.
Absolutely. And first things first, we need to be clear on what a confined space is. It's basically any enclosed or, partially enclosed area.
Big enough for someone to get into, right, for work like inspections, cleaning, maintenance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But crucially, it's not designed for people to be in there regularly. And this is key. Entry counts, even if you just stick your head across the opening.
Does your head? Wow.
That's the threshold.
Okay. And the examples. It's kind of surprising how many places fit this definition. We're talking tanks, boilers, production equipment.
Reactors, wells, silos, manholes, tunnels, sewers.
Storage bins, double holes on ships, pumping stations, pits, sumps, vessels.
Vats, kilns, vaults, pipelines, water reservoirs, sea manure pits, and equipment housings.
And excavations, too, if they're deeper than about 120 centimeters or 4 feet. In rooms with poor ventilation. It's like a much broader category than you might initially think.
Definitely. And inside these seemingly mundane spaces, you can find some really serious hazards. We can group them into, say, 3 main types.
Okay, what are they?
Well, the biggest one is often atmospheric hazards. Normal air is about 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen.
Right.
If that oxygen level drops below 19.5%, that's an immediate danger zone. You need a self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA.
And what about too much oxygen?
Good point. If it goes above 23.5%, that's a serious fire risk. Things ignite much more easily.
So it's a pretty narrow band for safety, that 21%. What causes oxygen levels to drop like that?
Several things. Rust formation actually consumes oxygen, so does combustion, obviously. Or the oxygen can just be pushed out, displaced by other gases, like welding gases, for example. And even microbial activity, like stuff decomposing, can use up the oxygen.
Okay, so lack of oxygen or too much? What else atmospherically?
Explosive or flammable gases. The danger level kicks in when they reach 10% or more of their lower flammable limit, the LFL.
LFL, lower flammable limit. Can you give an example?
Sure. Methane, CH4, its LFL is 5%. So if you have just 0.5% methane in the air, that's 10% of its LFL, you've got a significant explosion risk.
Only 0.5%. That's tiny.
It is. And safety standards, especially in places like petroleum facilities, often demand levels below that 10% LFL, sometimes aiming for absolute zero. There's also an upper flammable limit, UFL above that. There's too much gas and not enough oxygen to burn. But that range between LFL and UFL is the danger zone.
Got it. Flammable gases. And then there are toxic ones too, right?
Yes, toxic gases. The materials mention hydrogen sulfide, H2S. The limit for that over an 8-hour shift, the threshold limit value, or TLV, is typically under 10 parts per million.
10 ppm. Very small amounts.
Very. And there are others. Carbon monoxide, CO, the limit's around 35 ppm. Ammonia, NH3, about 25 ppm. Chlorine, less than 5 ppm. And you need specific monitors if you suspect other contaminants.
And some of these are tricky, aren't they? Like CO being odorless.
Exactly, the silent killer. And H2S, hydrogen sulfide, is weird because while it smells like rotten eggs at low levels, at higher concentrations, maybe above 35 ppm, it actually deadens your sense of smell. You stop smelling it, which is incredibly dangerous.
So you can't rely on your nose.
Absolutely not. Calibrated measurement instruments are essential, non-negotiable. And if you do have airborne contaminants or low oxygen, that's where respiratory protective equipment, RPE, comes in. But it has to be the right RPE for the specific hazard.
Okay, so atmospheric is huge. What are the other main hazard categories?
Mechanical and electrical hazards. Think about machinery inside the space unexpectedly starting up, or electrical circuits becoming live while someone's working.
That sounds like where lockout, kick-out procedures come in. LO-TOW.
Precisely. You need positive isolation. Then you've got physical hazards, things like extreme heat, which can be much worse in an enclosed space, poor lighting, insects, reptiles, even high noise levels can be amplified.
And just general working hazards.
Yeah, slips, trips, falls, using equipment that's faulty or hasn't been inspected. And then there's engulfment.
Engulfment, what's that?
It's when the material inside the space moves and traps someone. Imagine liquids in a tank shifting, or grain in a silo suddenly flowing, or the sides of an excavation collapsing. It can happen incredibly fast.
Sounds terrifying. Okay, so lots of potential dangers. How do we manage them? What does a safe system look like?
It's multi-layered. You need competent, trained people, good supervision, suitable equipment, and definitely a permit to work system.
The permit. That's like a safety checklist before entry.
Essentially, yes. It confirms hazards are identified and controlled. Then there's gas purging and ventilation. The aim is often at least 20 air changes per hour, with retesting after each hour.
20 air changes an hour. Wow.
Yeah, it's crucial. Plus, managing residues, constant atmospheric testing, that mechanical and electrical isolation, LO2O, the right PPE, including respiratory gear, safe work equipment, reliable communication methods.
Communication must be tough in some of these spaces.
It can be. You need clear methods. Also, safe ways to get in and out, managing flammable atmospheres, and having emergency rescue gear ready and inspected.
Rescue gear like ropes, harnesses.
Ropes, harnesses, fall arrest gear, lifelines, lifting equipment like tripods, first aid, protective clothing, breathing apparatus for rescuers, all maintained and ready with trained personnel to use it.
It seems like everyone involved has a specific role.
Absolutely. Management sets up the system and ensures it's followed. Supervisors are on the ground checking permits, isolations, doing briefings, making sure rescue gear is there, ensuring an observer is present.
And the workers themselves.
They need to be mentally and physically ready, understand the permit, wear their PPE, keep communication lines open, and know to evacuate immediately if something goes wrong.
And you mentioned an observer.
Yes, the confined space observer or attendant. Their only job is to monitor the people inside. They don't do other tasks. They track who's in and out, know how to use basic rescue gear like breathing apparatus and fire extinguishers, tell workers to exit if needed, recognize emergencies, and call for the rescue team.
So before anyone even thinks about going in, what's the absolute checklist?
Okay, deep breath. You need a safe work procedure or method statement covering everything. All hazards identified with controls using the hierarchy: eliminate, substitute, engineer, administrate, PPE. A full permit to work, signed off. Confirmed effective isolation. Trained people. Gas and oxygen checks done and confirmed safe. Ventilation running that 20 changes per hour minimum, rechecked hourly. Proper lighting, often explosion-proof 24V. Communication methods agreed and working. PPE inspected and worn correctly. Coordination with any other shifts. Rescue equipment present, inspected, and rescue personnel ready. And then procedures for finishing the job safely, too.
That is comprehensive, for good reason, clearly.
It has to be. The risks are just too high otherwise.
So the big takeaway here really seems to be that confined spaces, even ones that look harmless, pack a punch. They demand serious respect and rigorous safety protocols. No cutting corners.
None at all. And it does make you stop and think, doesn't it? How many places we might encounter, maybe not even at work, technically fit this description and carry these hidden risks.
Yeah, absolutely. It leaves me with this thought. Given how many of these dangers, especially the atmospheric ones, are totally invisible, how confident can we really be about the safety of any enclosed space before we or someone else enters? What are those non-negotiable questions we absolutely must ask before anyone crosses that threshold?